This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture equipment and supplies with the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us for our upcoming Rocket Kiln Workshop with Lisa Orr, July 18th through the 20th, 2025. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com to sign up. Cornell Studio Supply, owned and operated for potters by potters.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 547 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, Jonathan Eberle joins me to talk about the life and legacy of his father, Ed Eberle, who was an active artist for over 50 years and passed in 2023. Ed Eberle is best known for his porcelain sculptural vessels as well as his paintings that depict cultural archetypes through groupings of figures. In our interview, we talk about Ed's time at Carnegie Mellon, where he taught from 1975 to 1985, Jonathan's role as a legacy holder and filmmaker, and Eberle Studios, which continues to provide space for working artists in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to find out more, you can check out the website. That's eberlestudios.art. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So I wanted to start having you talk a little bit about Ed and talk about his work and give us some context about the environment that he worked in that you're still a part of.
My father realized early on that he wanted to be an artist. Throughout most of his career, what that means is that he's a studio artist. Having quality workspace is essential for his practice, for coming up with ideas, and actually for just doing the work. There's a part of doing the work where you're turning some of your brain off and you're just getting really engaged in what you're doing. And a lot of ceramic artists really know this. There's something primordial about clay. Once you get your hands in it, you're in a different kind of brain space. Maybe it's, you're thinking through your hands, you're thinking through your body, you're into the material, something's going on. And so that's all part of it. So it's easy to go to the park and just sketch, okay? But if you want to do pottery, if you want to do ceramics, sculpture, or throw, you have to have some basic setup, and that's gonna require having a studio space for your materials, for your equipment, for your kiln, that sort of thing. Because my father fell in love with clay as a medium in undergraduate school, as long as I've been alive, there's always been ceramics, his ceramic studio, and then the ceramic studios of all of his friends and peers that we would visit or that I would see regularly. And so that's a big part of it. It's just, and you can think of this also as just art studios in general. The artists of Pittsburgh growing up with lots of different kinds of artists in their studio space. So that's what I would have to say about what was the environment like. Um, it was like that, and then aside from that, we would have our family life and social life.
Am I right in thinking that what originally brought y'all to the Pittsburgh area was his teaching at Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that is true. But there's originally Ed was born in Western Pennsylvania. He grew up in Tarentum, which is a river town north of Pittsburgh, about 30-40 minutes north of Pittsburgh. And he was born and raised there. And after graduating high school, he was, working as a biology lab technician, but then he realized he wanted to be an artist because in all of his spare time, he was drawing people in the park and, just doing what I think he could. And he decided he wanted to be an artist. So he went to Edinburgh University. It was called Edinburgh at the time. And that's where he met his wife, Evelyn, my mother, Evelyn, and they're both artists. Edinburgh University had a program for art teachers because in the early to mid 60s, it wasn't really considered practical to go to college to be an artist. That creative program revolved around educating art teachers, art instructors, and so they both went through this rigorous curriculum at Edinburgh for all the arts. So to answer your question, there were after graduate school and teaching at the Philadelphia College of Art, Ed returned to Pittsburgh when the opportunity arose because it's all about being close with family, his parents, my mother's parents. And so when I was growing up, we were able to visit grandparents alternatively on the weekends, Sundays, having suppers and that sort of thing. So it was very close-knit family kind of community happening here.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the aesthetic of your father's work. Everything is black and white, or at least the very famous work of his. It's all black and white. It's a porcelain clay that is drawings using terrasigillata, like a very thin slip over top of that. But there's a starkness to the work that feels like drawing, like they feel like charcoal sketches that have been stretched into 3D form. Can you talk a little bit about that aesthetically, what his interest was in that?
Absolutely. So in Ed Eberle's career, his very earliest recollections of a creative experience, or what he has said was, paint and brush, pigment and the fibers of a brush and how that can go onto a surface like paper. That was his first experience, was sign painting and lettering in high school. Maybe it was a coincidence. I'm not really sure what. I never really heard from him the exact reason, but he started sign painting in high school, and he did it in high school for pep rallies and various clubs and groups in school and other types of things. And he was good at it. And, I believe that he also got a little bit of pocket change doing some freelance work for local businesses and that sort of thing. And this sign painting and lettering continued into college. When he graduated high school, Ed was a biology lab technician in Washington, D.C. The job paid horribly. He would find himself spending lunches and free time in the park, the various parks in downtown Washington, D.C. There's plenty of them, and he would sketch people and sketch pedestrians. Also, Ed had a really great art teacher in high school. And so those were really positive experiences. So he had some confidence from the art class in high school and a little bit of sign painting, so that when he was a young man, he found that he was sketching in his spare time and had a real love of drawing. I would say that drawing and or painting would have been his very first experiences as an artist, where he really felt like this was something that he wanted to do. In college, Ed went to Edinburgh, and so they had a really intense curriculum because they were training people to be an art teacher. Their curriculum exposed their students through all of the disciplines: printmaking, painting, drawing, all ceramics, sculpture. It was a very intense program in the sense that everybody was forced to try out all of these different kind of medium in what we consider to be fine art or classical art, all the different materials, all the different processes. And that's where Ed had a really positive experience working with clay. He kind of jokes around that in high school, he hated working in clay. His very first experiences in clay, it was like gritty. He didn't like the feeling of the clay getting under his fingernails, he would joke. But then in college, somehow that experience broke the ice. The professor at the time was very boisterous and energetic and really pumped people up. And he had a really good experience with clay and ceramics, and just something happened and he really fell in love with it. So after undergraduate school, Ed decided to pursue graduate school for fine art. And he, during those years in the 60s, it was all about Alfred University. Alfred University had a powerhouse of ceramics, professors, legacy of, people like Dan Rhodes, Val Cushing. So many ceramic artists were teaching at Alfred. And there was a summer school experience that Ed had, really with Tischler was his name, who went off to teach in Denver. And I think it was Maynard Tischler or something like that. And so that was a really positive experience. And so it was kind of like everybody who's anybody or whatever, everybody was heading to Alfred. So there was actually a contingency of classmates at Edinburgh who went to Alfred along with Ed. And so these are some of the closest family friends that we've had throughout our lives. I feel like I'm diverging for this podcast, but these are really interesting things for the listener too. So I know you were asking about Ed's black and white work, but I'm just going to plug, like one of Ed's lifetime friends was a roommate in undergraduate, Chip Clausen, who wound up working for the majority of his career off and on at Archie Bray.
I know Chip well, and I've interviewed him on the show, so it's nice to know they have a connection because geographically they were so far apart for most of their lives.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But they were roommates in undergrad school and have been, very good friends ever since. So what happened is when Ed was at Alfred, okay, there was a lot of good experiences that he had there, and certainly he really got interested in sculpture and ceramics, and was very good at throwing. Ed used to have this phrase, I don't like to toot my own horn kind of thing, but Ed was talented at throwing. Somehow he had the touch, and he was able to, get a coveted throwing assistantship when he was in graduate school for a teaching assistantship, and he was just really good at throwing. But when he left Alfred, he had he had a sculpture professor named Bill Perry. When Ed was leaving school, Perry said, "Hey, Ed, you might want to consider combining your love and talent of drawing and painting with your love of throwing and sculpture." And it kind of gives me shivers to talk about it because, these are the things that happen in people's lives that determine their destiny. And my father listened to what his mentor said, and had been pursuing the combination of, surface design, surface decoration, painting, surface treatment. He was concerned with that throughout his whole career. Was Eberle really good at throwing pots and having remarkable? Yes. He got the kind of foundation for, pottery and glazes that anybody could have hoped for with the training that he received at Alfred in the late 60s. And he has beautiful functional ware that he made all the time. But it was this combination of his initial love of drawing and sketching and painting, and combining that with the surface on the ceramics. And that happened he throughout his whole career. I can go into a little bit more detail about that, but that's the essence of it. Is he had always been doing that, I believe, almost since he was a student at Alfred.
Well, one of the other hallmarks of the work is that it's figural based. Like there are figures drawn and painted on the forms. There are also sometimes abstracted sculptures that are reminiscent of the figure, even if they're not as specific as the drawn figures. But because of that, there's often a loneliness I get from the work because there's so many figures, but they're not interacting. They almost seem as if they're interacting in overlapping dreams. Like they exist in the same visual plane, but they don't appear to exist in the same emotional plane. Can you talk about that as a creative person yourself? Do you sense that loneliness in the work, or what's the emotional sense that you get from the work?
Yeah, that's a really wonderful observation, and it's true. But there's some surprises. There are some surprises with when you think about this kind of work, and that these figures might be, disassociated or dreamlike. The first thing is that the figures, Ed would always describe his figurative work as imagistic. So they're not literal figures. We have portfolios of his that he might have gone to the museum and done some figure drawing sessions and this type of thing. And they're really beautiful. But the figures that are in Ed's work are actually, they're archetypes. Okay. Or if you think about in different types of mythological or faith-based traditions, they might be energies or principalities, that angels, demons, spirits, archetypes, Jungian archetypes. And they're not necessarily, yes, there are sometimes, like in dreams, some of the figures in Ed Eberle's work looks like some people from his family, or looks like a self-portrait. That does come up. But by far and large, at this point, I interpret the figurative work as expressions of consciousness rather than material experience. And so that's one perhaps surprising explanation of the loneliness that might be experienced there, because it's not a physical connection. It is a psychological or a spiritual, ethereal type of depiction. That's what you're looking at. Now, there's another way that I would describe his work, and that is that while the figures in his work might seem a little bit distant or a little bit disassociated with the viewer, there's something about my father's artwork as a whole that I would say is extremely warm, and it's extremely friendly, in the sense that it doesn't really matter if you're young or old. It doesn't matter if you're a ceramic artist or even an artist at all. It's like there's something there to strike the interest and the curiosity in anyone. And I feel like that is present in almost all of his portfolios. It's like a relationship with him. It's an invitation to play. It's an invitation to a kind of a conversation. It's an invitation to explore. And that's a very curious thing. Definitely, a lot of what artists go through is a lonely process, because they're having relationship with us through their work. It's like an indirect kind of approach. It's fascinating how easy it is for people to find something that they like.
Yeah, and actually, I want to take a tangent, because when you were talking about archetypes, and when I was reading up on your father, he was at Carnegie Mellon from 75 to 85, and when he was there, in his bio, it talks about he would bring in lecturers which he brought in some of the like classics, like MC Richards was a writer around the time who's influential. But then he also brought in Joseph Campbell, which is interesting that a ceramic professor could get Joseph Campbell to come. But also, it just shows the interest is that there's something deeper that he's looking at in the work. And I would imagine that's what he wanted Joseph Campbell to come talk about to the students. So did he ever talk about that visit from Joseph Campbell?
Absolutely. Absolutely, he would talk about it. I would say that one of the most impressive aspects of that is the relationship that Ed had with the students. It was a very special relationship. Teaching was a particular talent of his, in that many of his students, undergraduate and graduate students, wound up becoming lifetime friends. They would maintain a connection with him. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is, as much as Joseph Campbell was important to Ed in his career and development, intellectually, spiritually, he wanted to share that with the students. So that was this process that I don't know if there was a real beginning or an end to it. Joseph Campbell was really, really important in his life. And because of that type of connection, Joseph Campbell agreed to come. Campbell agreed to come to Carnegie Mellon specifically for the ceramic students. That was part of the story. When Ed was talking with Campbell about coming, he said, "Yes, I will come just for the art students." He was very clear about that. That's why he was there. And he not only did he give the lecture, but they had a potluck in the art studio and a social. And so Campbell was in the art studio with the students and all of their work, and everybody was hanging out and talking and having fun. So there's this translation about how, there's this transparency with being Ed loves clay, he loves art, he's intellectually curious about mythology, psychology, spirituality, and trying to share that kind of intellectual development with his students. And that was the basis of that experience and many others.
I wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about your role in his career. At this point, you're kind of the keeper of the legacy, not only because you are at the studio and running the studio that he worked in, but more so that you were documenting the latter years of his career through film, through conversation, I'm sure, through audio, through all these things. So can you talk about you as a creative person? How do you build a legacy for someone you're so close to? Because then he's your dad, but also when we're talking, you often refer to him as Ed. Like I can tell you're switching like to professional role, which I think is the legacy building role. So can you talk about that as a son, but also as a professional? How do you think about building a legacy?
Well, the first thing is it has to be a labor of love, in the sense that you're a little bit unthinking, for the same reason why an artist might be compelled to do their work. I've had experiences where my appreciation for Ed's career has only grown. My understanding for him as a human being has grown. I'm kind of doing it the same way everybody else does, one day at a time. There's a lot to learn. It has all of the drama. There's wins, there's fails, and I'm not perfect, so things kind of get past me, as far as being the custodian of all this. But it's been a wonderful adventure, and there are a lot of what I call Easter eggs in my father's career. Um, I have really wonderful people that help me part time. And we're doing cataloging and discovering. But quite literally, it's kind of like putting the pieces of a puzzle together also for me. Now, I want to backpedal and kind of say something, if I can do it really briefly. There was a time in my life when I was a young man, but old enough to want to be thoroughly independent. And now I was born with an affinity towards science. The way that life has played out for me, I was not able to pursue that in terms of a career. But I definitely have an affinity and an interest in physical science, biological science. And during my 30s, I was working at a large uh, university, um, for their medical school, and was also taking a lot of classes, pre-med classes, biology classes. And in a certain sense, I was trying, now I realize I was trying to put myself on the exact opposite end of the universe as my father. I do have a personal affinity, but then there was this thought where, oh, science is great. Science cures diseases. Science helps people. But you have like these artists, I mean, like they're just making art. It's just self-involved, whatever. And I really had pumped all of my faith in biology and medicine for years. To make a long story short, I got really interested in neuroscience, evolution, and that even developed an interest in consciousness and how all this kind of fits together. And wouldn't you know that as my father had started to age and he needed some help with his art studio, when I relocated back to Pittsburgh and got involved in helping him with his business, over a period of years, I began to see in his artwork everything that I thought I knew about physics, biology, human nature, creation. The big questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Who are we? It's like all in his work. Now, I might not have had the attention or the ability to recognize that without having taken all this coursework or spent literally, you know, 10 or 20 years just thinking about science, science, science. But there behind me is a sculpture that has quantum evolutionary neurobiology. The sculpture is a diagram of how all of this works. And it's astonishing to me how my father, through a monk like disciplined studio practice, was able to pull out of thin air all of these truths about our existence, about humanity. It's all in his artwork.
I wonder too how much of your influence and also his interests were shaped by Carnegie Mellon is not your average university. Like it is a intellectually rigorous university in all the programs. There's not like a slacker program at Carnegie Mellon. You know what I mean? So I think the intellectual rigor and science probably gives Pittsburgh a different feeling as a creative environment. Because I wanted to use this as a segue to the fact that you're still running the studio and that there's artists that come in and work in that studio. But your average Pittsburgh artist, I think, is maybe different than your average LA artist or your average even Chicago artist because that environment is different.
Yeah, and we do need it all. There was some San Francisco artists that came to Philadelphia that were very influential in with Ed and his peers in the early 70s. There are these stories of influence, but Pittsburgh is a unique environment. It's very right brain and left brain all at the same time. And people would think of Pittsburgh as environmentally challenged, blue collar, not quite Midwest, not quite East Coast, something, but it's really interesting what Pittsburgh has to offer. For that reason, I actually am embarking upon what had originated as a documentary film project about my father's career, but now I'm interviewing artists about their practice, artists and scientists, and others, people in spiritual disciplines and intellectual disciplines and so forth, about the conscious experience and creativity. And this is a really wonderful environment. There are so many interesting people who are working here in Pittsburgh, uh, not just with Carnegie Mellon, but we have a lot of institutional pillars here with our museum systems. There are great museums in the region. The arts organizations here are just a knockout. We kind of are stumbling into our niche in the sense that working with my father, we had a incredible experience with the 2018 NCECA conference that was in Pittsburgh. That's really why I came back, was to help my parents to prepare for that tidal wave of, energy, and the studio here was a venue. We had visitors from all over the world by the busload coming through here. Literally, it felt like thousands of people were coming through the studio. And that public engagement, the public engagement from NCECA was so wonderful that our family decided to open up the gallery and start to do some exhibits. And we decided to build artists' studios on our first floor and provide, talking with Ed, what do artists need? They need quality workspace. If there's one thing that I remember about my father, it's that he had this 6 days a week work ethic. He woke up and he went to work in his studio every day. He treated it like a job. And that work ethic pays off. You could see it in artists' careers.
So now when artists come to the studio to work in the workspace, before we were recording, you mentioned that it's a great space for people that are artists that have an artistic practice, but maybe aren't ceramic artists. So they need somewhere that they can discover and explore ceramics. So can you talk a little bit about that, the concept of sort of bringing people into ceramics that are already artists?
Somewhere earlier in my life, we start to develop these psychological disciplines for ourselves. And one of the thoughts that I have is, I don't like to talk about what I don't want. I like to talk about what I do want. And so what do we want? We want to elevate ceramics as a medium in fine art. I believe that there are a lot of ceramic artists who have a lot to say about that. How ceramics is treated in institutional collections like museums, how ceramics is treated by galleries. We've seen incredible growth in recent decades for ceramics as a medium and its recognition in the art world. And so that's a wonderful story. And so what do we want? We want to elevate ceramics as a medium in fine art. Half of our artists work in ceramics exclusively, but the other half of our artists are multidisciplinary artists, where ceramics is part of a whole practice that they engage in, ranging from film, photography, sculpture, woodworking, assemblage, other types of sculpture. There are fantastic organizations that have ceramics classes and pottery classes and do community outreach in Pittsburgh for ceramics and fine art, where we really feel like we're strong and are continuing to explore is how are we collaborating with other arts organizations in the city that aren't necessarily involved in ceramics, and help with exhibition and allowing other ceramic artists in the Pittsburgh area, allowing how we can collaborate and allow other artists in the Pittsburgh area who might be painters or sculptors, or and to bring them in and to provide them with experiences in clay. They may not necessarily they might be interested in taking a workshop, but they already have a can-do attitude with regards to exploring and making work, making mistakes, They know they're already experienced as an artist. And I think that once people really are involved in their artistic practice, they know that there are no mistakes. They're ready to get into the material, to learn from it, to work with it, and to find out what they can do with it. And that's what happens here.
To wrap up, can you let people know how they can find out more? So, for instance, maybe the website or other information about the studio?
Absolutely. We have a website, eberlestudios.art. It's a humble website, but it will continue to grow and develop. We also have a Instagram and Facebook for Edward Eberle, and also Eberle Studios. And that's also a great way to keep in touch and see how things are going. You can always call us on the phone, 321-CLAY-ART is our phone number, and or shoot us an email, contact@eberlestudios.art.
Well, thanks so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on the Red Clay Rambler.
I'd like to thank Jonathan for coming on the show. I appreciate his time, and it was wonderful to learn more about his father Ed's work. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art and Cornell Studio Supply. We are looking for sponsors for the 14th season of the show, so if you're interested, please get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.